I would like a reading of the entire ledger, please.
That would be stored now by 9:30.
Well, the finance report's on the regular. We should have the full reading of all checks cashed in the last 90 days since our last finance report. Or it's July only, so we pull that out of the computer. No, it's in the 7 o'clock. You'll have time. Good. Work session is now called to order. First item is the 9-month budget update. It's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor and Board. Tonight, good evening, Mayor and Board. Once again, tonight our first presentation will be over the 9-month budget update. This budget update is one that we build on for our next presentation when we start talking about fiscal 25. So as we go through this, you will see kind of the same trends. I will probably talk a couple of things repetitive over the next couple presentations, just because this report is very important as we look at 25. Hey, Linda. Perfect. First off, just a recap of all the budget amendments we've done through third quarter. First up was the budget amendment done in November of 23 in the amount of $732,000. Most of these items were carry forward item capital projects. Budget amendment number 2 was done in March. We had a 30,000 expenditure to the general fund, 200 to combined water and wastewater fund. Those expenses took care of the police FOP union, as well as a couple other projects in the utility side. Budget amendment number 3 was done in May. That amounted to 45,000 to the general fund and 15,000 to the combined water and wastewater fund. And finally, our last one was done in May. That was 460,000 to the commercial street sidewalk project, as well as 1 million to streetscape phase 3, both of those in the utility fund. Looking at the general fund overview, projected general fund revenue is approximately 400,000 over budget. As we dive into this, you will see most of that increase is through sales and use tax, as well as interest income. We've also done a slight increase in the expenditure side, increasing just over $300,000, netting about 100,000 there, as we'll see here shortly. Some of the projects that we do have, capital improvement projects that we do have in the general fund, is the 4th Street improvement, Quincy Boulevard, and the wayfinding signage. Wayfinding signage is not happening until we get a little more guidance. The Quincy Boulevard is in the punch list phase. I just got an update today. That punch list phase is at this point waiting for seeding in the fall. As we break down the revenue, we'll first look at property tax. Property tax is already over our 24 budget. Most of that is received by January, and typically in the past history, we've been at 99.6% at this point. We're obviously a little higher, hence the higher projection. We're at 100.9% at this point. Here's a quick visual of the property tax revenue over the last 3 years. As you can see, every year we've steadily increased through our budget as well as our actual and this year's projections. Sales tax revenue is expected to beat budget. This is one area that staff will be monitoring pretty closely in the next month or so as we wrap up the 25 budget. Sales tax in general has been slowing down. We don't know if it's just an anomaly for us for past 4 or 5 weeks. The September disbursement will tell us quite a bit going forward. But just in general, most cities, both Kansas side and Missouri side, is seeing a slight decrease or slowdown in the sales tax. Once again, we'll do another 3-year graph on the sales tax history. We have done very well over the last few years and hope that continues in this economy. Right now, we are projected to be 160,000 over prior year actual. Use tax has been a welcome surprise. We are projected to exceed budget by 175,000. Use tax again is the taxes that is taxed on purchases you make basically online. Best example is Amazon. The more people are buying online, the higher this use tax amount will go. Right now, we are projected to just be over 900,000 at the end of the year.
So can that be where our sales tax is?
That would be the use tax.
Yes. But our,
That's where it's offsetting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
that's where the missing
yeah,
sales
some
tax
of it,
is.
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Here is a quick visual on that use tax. As you can see, we have done very, very well over the past few years. Couple other areas that hit the general fund and should be noted is interest income. Right now, we are projected to be roughly 237,000 over budget. The next one to the right is the building permit revenue. With the slowdown in the economy as well as interest rates, the city has recognized a decrease in permits. We are projecting it to be roughly 100,000 by year end. This is, I believe, 25,000 higher than what I reported mid-year. So we are seeing a little bit of uptick.
Rick, just to kind of remind everybody, I know the board knows, but our year end is October 31st, correct?
Correct. Correct. Here is the general fund bottom line in numbers. As you can see in our budgeted 24, we were expected to decrease our fund balance by 833,000 based on budget. Projections for 24 at this point, and I alluded to this a couple slides ago, roughly 100,000 to the good. That decrease in the fund balance is projected to only decrease by 300 or 731,000. Next up is our fund balance analysis. At the end of 24, we are projected to be at 43.5% of operating expenditures, which is very good. Our target reserve is at 25%. And that is a change from 3 years ago at 40%.
Which we still never hit 40%.
All right, moving on out of the general fund. Our first stop will be at the capital improvement sales tax fund. What I have done for this third quarter review in our projections, I have taken out items that we know that we are not going to be hitting, such as the 1,488,000 in the MoDOT reimbursement. So that is pulled out of this revenue projection. That is basically a carry forward. This project will be pushed forward to 25. That reimbursement will coincide with our expenditures in 25. And on the bottom there, with that decrease in the projects that we were going to propose to do in 24, that also has decreased our projections for the expenditure side. Looking at a 3-year history of the capital improvement sales tax fund, the red is obviously the budget. With 24, the budget is at the 2.2 million. I did add a line, very faint line, as you can see, to the left of the projection, the orange projection column. There is a black line there. That is where if we had not budgeted for the 1.4, 1.5 million in reimbursement, that is where our budget would have been. So that just a quick, instead of making it a really busy slide, I just added a line just to kind of have a quick visual of where we would have been without that reimbursement.
This is our grants, correct? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah. That we received,
Is that considered a grant, Chuck?
or not a grant. but
The
yeah,
MoDOT
it was.
reimbursement? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And then also the same thing in 23, I did not put a line on there, but we did have 488,000 earmarked from the MoDOT reimbursement during 23 as well. Transportation sales tax fund. Again, another fund where we do have a reimbursement. This one's through MARC reimbursement of 960,000. I have taken that out of the 24 projection to make that a little more comparable. That also reflects down in the expenditure side again. In that fund, we have completed 2 projects, the asphalt overlay and the sidewalk replacement program. And then with that 960,000 coming out, that will go to the commercial street and sidewalks in 25. Like the capital improvement sales tax fund, I also put a line here so you can have a quick visual of where this would have been budgeted had that 960,000 not been added to revenue. So both of those funds have performed as expected. We are projected to be just a little over projected budget, less those reimbursements. Next up is the combined water and wastewater fund. Again, I have taken out the COP proceeds to make this a little more comparable. Those proceeds were just over 4.3 million. So I've taken that out of our revenue projections. Most projects that fall under this fund have been pushed forward. We will see more detail here shortly, but the expense side is obviously decreased from what we had budgeted, basically because we're not doing some of those bigger projects in 24. here is this project list. The in progress status, that could be anywhere from preliminary discussions to construction. Most of those are not in the construction phase yet, where the large expenses will occur. But we did complete those top three this year. Water and wastewater sales revenue. Water sales is projected to be slightly over our projected, roughly almost 100,000. Right now, we are sitting at 2.4 with 3 months to go to be added to this. On the wastewater sales, they have fared just a slightly better. Right now, we are projected to be just under 200,000 above budget. And again, right now at this point, at 9 months in, we are at just over 2 million in revenue. Quick visual of both the water and wastewater sales revenue 3-year history. As you can see, we've steadily increased every year. This also comes in play when we talk rate increases, as we will get a lot more detail here shortly as well. The combined water and wastewater fund bottom line, we were projected or budgeted to decrease fund balance by 5 million. Because we've pushed so many projects to 25, we have fared much better. We are projected to add to the fund balance 680,000. Now, keep in mind, we've pushed a lot of stuff forward. We are still in an uphill battle. We still have quite a few projects we got to tackle in the next year or two. Sanitation fund. This revenue, I know I've mentioned before, is a little bit difficult to project, only because we provide GFL with our utility account balance for a number of counts. That's how they do the billing to us, and that's how we bill them. So this, from what we budgeted, we've had less utility accounts. You can just make that assumption based on the projection than what we projected for 24. Park and stormwater sales tax fund. The revenue again has decreased. We do have, I did not mention it there. We do, well, I guess I did, but not the dollar amount. 184,000 for the OK Trail, railroad trails have been taken out of that and pushed to 25. In that fund, we've completed the Stonebridge stormwater improvements and started Emerald Ridge and Stonebridge, again, the construction side of the Stonebridge stormwater improvements. The vehicle and equipment replacement fund. Right now, revenue will not change. We have transferred to this fund a total of 373,000. Our expenditures are coming in, I'm being as conservative as possible here. They are coming in higher than budgeted. As we look at the 25 budget, we will dive into some of the reasons this has increased. We still believe that overall we are coming out on the good side based on our maintenance charges for the last, ever since we started enterprise. It was just this year, though, that we did get to 38 vehicles, which is what we believe is the top number that we're going to have other than organic growth. Then we will look at adding more vehicles. Looking at the overview of the 9-month. On revenues, general fund revenues continue to forecast above budget, again, with especially the sales tax, use tax, and interest earnings. And water and wastewater revenue in the utility fund continues to be slightly above budget as well. Expenditures. Inflation remains a significant factor in all of the department operational budgets, particularly in areas such as the commodities, some of the employee benefits and repairs and maintenance have been hit by inflation, just like everybody else in the economy. It's not immune to the city. So the inflation is affecting some of our projections at this point. Looking at 25, as I alluded to, many of the CIP projects have been pushed forward to 25. If there's any kind of reimbursement grant money, that will also be pushed to 25 to coincide with our expenses. This, I want to reiterate that this has no negative effect on our fund balances. It's only improving them temporarily until we go through these projects. So we will see some fund balances increase at the end of this year.
Rick, speaking of that, that interest income, I believe it was 157. I don't know if I wrote that down right for year to date, I think. Does that sound about right? Interest income, about 157,000. Is that right?
For interest income?
Yes.
Total?
Well, was that this third quarter or?
Yeah, roughly.
Roughly
Yes,
third
yes.
quarter,
It's
yeah.
roughly 50,000 right now.
Right, right. Okay. I was just curious.
Yep.
And obviously, we're all waiting what the Federal
Right.
Reserve will do and likelihood it.
Right.
can
The
turn it
way
down.
our computation
We're
with,
one-year CDs starting in July. Month I'm going.
with
just signed
central
them.
bank, we are capped at 5%. That has been worked into our agreement. So whether or not we could be getting 5.10, we are capped at the 5% with central bank. And that'll be, of course, one area that we look at pretty hard for 25, especially with Stemmer's rate meetings, which I believe is like the 17th and 18th.
Rick, I like the line that you put in there showing where we'd be without the grants. I like that, adding that to it.
Good deal. Yep. Anybody else on the 9-month?
We're going to number 3.
It was close. It's 5:53. You said 5:55, but was that for everything or
was
just
for
the 9 months? Okay, I take that back.
7:45.
All right, looking at our first discussion of the 25 budget as well as the 5-year CIP. As we review this first round of the 25 budget, I want to highlight that the last 2 or 3 years have resulted in better than expected financial results. As we just talked about, like I said, I will be repeating myself a few times. Sales tax, use tax, interest income, all has been, especially interest income, has been a pleasant surprise to the city. where we have had a windfall of some money over budget. As we look forward, we now know that interest rates will begin to decline, and the economy in general is somewhat lacking a little bit of confidence. In 25, in the 25 budget, there is not really anything new. We are not necessarily adding employees. We are not adding necessarily projects or big expenditures. What we will do is address inflation when it comes to commodities. And we will start looking a little harder at CIP projects as we've pushed many of them forward. And now we do have to start knocking off some of these. Did you, Cynthia, you mentioned you might want to have a comment?
Actually, you've hit a number of my points, but do want to make sure, I want to thank Rick and staff on preparing the budget that you have before you. We plan to seek feedback from you all at this meeting, and if we need some additional follow-up discussion, and then we'll be moving on a path toward approval of the budget. The information that's provided tonight incorporates work that we have done with you through the summer in a series of work sessions, really the work at the retreat as well. But as what Rick said, if I can get my words right, this reflects really a maintenance budget. We're not adding new programs. We're not adding new staffing. We are working to ensure that we continue to provide the level of services that we have over the past. In order to be able to do that, our focus on this budget really is on employee recruitment and retention. Retention of employees and recruitment is necessary. The budget is affected, as we've talked about through the 9-month update. Inflation has an effect on our expenditure levels, and that has an effect then on how we're able to fund projects. But Rick has done a great job in coming on board, understanding our budget, and doing that while we've been in the midst of a transition in our software, which causes some comparative information to be a little more difficult to do. So appreciative of the time that he's put in on this. So from that, Rick.
Thank you. Just on this screen, I'll just point out the last couple bullet points there. August and September is our discussions on the budget. September, I expect to come back. I'm not expecting it to change much. I'm hopeful that some of the trends that we will be talking about were just temporary trends, such as sales tax. And in September, that'll allow us to have another month to be able to look at it, as well as I'll be able to look at month-to-date September bills as well, and hopefully get as close as I can on this. I have taken a very conservative approach on this budget. So hopefully in September, I can come back and say, hey, look, revenue came in a little higher. Expenses are staying down. And we close some of these gaps a little quicker. First slide there is some of the operating budget assumptions that we will make as we go through this. That first one, health insurance premiums at 15%. This is a broker assumption. We will receive what should be our final numbers sometime in September, could be as late as October, but right now we are projecting 15%. The next couple are with fuel, then electricity. Confinement fees, I will just talk real quickly about just because it's at 100%. This is based solely on Clay County model of how they are going to be charging for inmates. Next up is the Tyler Technologies. As we've mentioned before, we've gone through a couple migrations, both on the financial and the utility side. Right now, we are looking at a 31% increase for that annual bill. Property and liability insurance is at 11%. And workers' compensation rate changes to a 9% increase. Couple other necessary operating items that need to be mentioned. The vehicle and equipment replacement fund, financial support. I have moved that to 390,000. I have reported previously at 330,000. As you can if you remember over the 9-month presentation, we are looking at a slight increase in the expense side, which again, staff will look into this as closely as possible, make sure that we are coming out good on this contract. Next up was IT services, having an increase of 39,000. Couple caveats on this one. Starting this month, we're able to get rid of one vendor, which is our Microsoft 365 annual license. That is wrapped into our new contract. That is a savings of 14,000 on that one. Next year, we'll also have an additional savings. Basically, it comes down to cybersecurity. It's our training for cybersecurity. That'll be roughly around a $5,000 savings.
But that increase of 39,000, is that taking those two decreases out of it, or would that,
It is
this would
not.
be low?
Those are
Okay.
going to be additional. Yep. That 14,000, we just made that change this month. We wanted to make sure that we weren't losing our license. I asked 3 different ways with Allo just to make sure. Didn't want to walk in one day and have no computer. So that just took effect this month. And the know before, which is our cybersecurity, that will expire early next year.
Hey, Rick, a quick question on that last slide.
Yep.
Or 2 of them. On the Smith Fork lease, when does that change again as far as to go up?
Every year.
Every
Every
year?
year.
Up annually, yeah, and
Okay.
it starts, so this increase, the 53 to 56, we start, that rate of increase really escalates in the next several years. Had a conversation as recently as today with John Reddick, our attorney. We have reached out a number of times to the Corps to see if there are ways we could discuss changing that. As we all know, the Corps moves at the Corps' pace, and we're exploring different ways of being able to look at that, because it's taken a significant impact on our budget. So we're in ongoing conversations, but we can't at this point in time project any reductions in those. That's from a court-ordered settlement agreement from the late 1970s. So that's how that payment plan was worked out, but we'd like to be able to explore some.
I think we published the payment schedule. It's available on our website and it's out there just about every year, but
Yep.
we hit triple digits pretty soon.
We do,
Mm.
that we do. Rick actually has a copy of it
I
here.
was just going to rattle off a few numbers for you.
What was it 6 years ago? Under 30?
6 years ago, it was at 33. Now
What
it's at
happens when you sue the
56.
federal government and lose?
Right. 25 will be at 56. Just going 5 years, because I'm not going to rattle off every year here. 2030, it's at 71.5. 2035, it's at 91,000. 2040, it's at 116,000. 2045, it's at 149,000.
Mm.
And at the end in 2048, which is the last year, is at 172,000. So we have some very large increases in about 5 years.
It's way cheaper than the alternative though, that they offer in the contract.
Right. Right.
Well, thank you, Rick. Thank you, Cynthia. And on the police overtime, how did you figure the sergeant overtime? Was there a number that you figured in there since we're still kind of in
Based
limbo?
on history.
Okay.
That's an ever-changing number as well.
Okay.
But based on history, based on where we've been going with our projections. That was the number that we came up with.
Okay, thank you.
Next up is a quick overview of our 24 outstanding debt. We had Go bonds, just over 5 million, COP, just over 7 million. Both of those are on the utility side. They do not affect the general fund. The Go bonds were water pollution control improvements, and the COP was water and wastewater improvements.
And the 2018 dates actually carry over from refinance that saved us about 200,000, if I remember my number right, from Cynthia announcing it. 18 at the chamber.
Some of those were correct,
There.
but those also
And the
reflect
interceptor.
the interceptor, that GO bond, as Rick calls Go bonds, the
Good
GO
job.
or general obligation bonds, those are supported, all of the debt financing is supported by the rates for the utilities. GO bonds require voter approval. COP bonds do not.
On a related note to our bond rating, we are currently still at an AA minus. This is assigned by the S&P firm. There's basically three rating firms. You got Moody's, you got Finch, and you got S&P. This was done in February of 2019. And based on the criteria there to the left, the double A minus, that is considered very strong. It is, they kind of look at it in buckets to make it simple. It is the low end of the very strong. You can go for S&P, you can go as high as AAA. That is extremely strong. There's not a whole lot of companies that are at that. Some
I don't
companies.
think there's any cities that are,
Yeah.
there's a
and
few counties,
There's
but.
counties or there's
Cumberland Park
cities.
has historically
Yeah.
repeatedly been AAA, but that's based on the sales tax and property tax base that they have to support that.
Right.
Yeah, but that's also
Looking at
bigger
the
than
future.
That's
Clay County.
of something of our size. Yeah, exactly,
It's
exactly.
a revenue stream bigger than Clay County's.
Yeah, yes. And just as a reminder as well, we aren't rated on an annual basis. We are rated whenever we would go out to issue debt. So the last time we issued debt was in 2019, and that was for the COPs that we issued at that point in time.
Yep.
But Cynthia, to the point, we get an annual audit each year from an outside
Mhm.
firm, correct? So,
That's correct.
yeah.
We're audited annually. Yes, this is just so this rating is a bond rating. So
Correct.
it's a rating of our capacity to repay that debt.
Yeah, and we've added a property or a sales and a sales tax since then too, so. The Parks and Stormwater tax came in at 2020, so. We have one more revenue stream that we didn't have in 19.
However, neither of those would impact the funding source to repay those
Yep.
bonds.
Unless we do a Parks bond, Matt.
If we were to look at something that would general obligation, that would be funded by some other source.
Good thing Matt's been saving all that money for the park. We don't have to go out for debt.
All right, moving on. Some of the funded highlights that we have included in the budget projection for 25 includes the following that you're seeing there. I will make special mention just because I pointed it out on our increases of our 100% increase in confinement fees. That bottom line item, holding cell benches,
Yeah, we're saving money, right?
that is an attempt to save money on those confinement.
Give them a place to
fees.
sit.
We can hold them a little bit longer and hopefully avoid having to do a transfer.
Would not be fun to stand in that cell for a long period of time.
Right. And this list spills over to this page. A couple highlights there. You have second to the bottom, the campground road repair, we do have that plugged in at 150,000. We feel like this is a needed project to improve the campground setting. Our campground, I think our projection for revenue this year is like 266,000. So it is a decent piece of the parks revenue streams. So we are hoping that this 150,000 will do some wonders on some of the streets and be able to repair some of the stuff that's out there.
Matt, was that looking at adding paving to some of the sites for ADA? Can we put that as an alternative when we put it out to bid? Okay, like 2 or 3.
Also on here, or not on here, we have taken it off. We've kind of made it a few indications about it. We did have, through discussions, especially at the retreat, a new Parks and Rec position. We have removed it at this point just because right now we're unsure if it's 100% needed. In the future, we would like to include this. But that does have some cost savings. What was going to happen was a reclassification of a current employee and then fill in that back position. And we just, as of, what was it, yesterday on the senior, Matt? Yesterday, the senior center, we received word. We did ask for, I believe, 103,000 in a grant to fund the senior center, especially Amy's position there. We did get that back. Right now it's sitting at 60,000. That does give us some additional monies to expand some programming. Matt and I will be talking over the next week and figuring out how best to utilize that extra money.
So as the board will recall, a couple weeks ago, I think, or, well, it was in early July, right, that we submitted that grant request? And so we've received word back on that. The 103,000 would have provided for Amy going to full-time, so, and then looking at 5-day lunch service and some expanded hours. The increase here is not enough to make that full-time, but we can expand some of the programming, and that's what they'll be working on, and we'll plug that into the budget on the revenue and expenditure side.
Two other items that is not in the budget at this point. First off, this is strategic planning. We had originally talked about putting 50,000 to that program. That is not in this budget. The second one is the Northland Career Development Center. We had a presentation over the last couple months on that. We talked about 2,500 at one point. That is not in this budget either. That is up for discussion as well.
Rick, and I just want to comment on that. I think that it's important that as a board, we consider that. I know we're talking conservative budget and we're trying to not add a lot of things, but I feel like it positions us well to be in support of, which I think we'll be able to take advantage of this Northland Career Center when it's built to offer that $2,500. So I'm not sure how the rest of the board feels, but I sure think it should be there.
I'm in agreement as well. I think it's just an investment, a good investment for our students.
Okay. We can definitely add it in, and it is 2,500. So everybody's somewhat of an agreement on it. We will definitely add that in going forward. Next up is our compensation scenarios. As both Cynthia and I talked about in the beginning of this, our focus is really on retaining our employees and recruitment. We are I think we did the study back in 2022, and made some increases at that time. Most cities did another study after us, so we were kind of behind the 8 ball right away. Right now, we came to you with 2 scenarios in the beginning. The 6% all, the 8% directors, and 6% frontline. We expanded that after the retreat to include 8% all, 8% directors, 10% frontline, as well as 10% all. And then in July, at our July 16th meeting, we were given another scenario to run that was 10% directors, 8% frontline. That highlighted column is what is built into this budget. This does include the police officers. Their union contract does not include the sergeant increases that we are expecting, but we are still in discussions.
I'm going to make a comment here. Since you're still in discussion with the sergeants, negotiating there, I don't know if we need to look at changing that and going back down to maybe 8% or 8% directors and 6% frontline. Because I think it's just, is it 4 individuals? Do we have 4 sergeants?
Yeah.
That salaries would be impacted?
Mhm.
I don't know if we ought to drop back down to maybe just 8% overall to have that cushion for that negotiation.
8 and 6 or 8 overall?
Probably just 8 overall, because I think with just 4 positions, that might be enough to compensate for that potential agreement. I don't
Right.
know where you're at, but I just want to put that out there.
That was part of our discussions and deciding on the new Parks and Rec. We wanted to focus on our current employees and especially recruitment. It's getting pretty difficult to recruit with just being the competitiveness that's out there right now. That is one thing. I also, in our September, our second discussion, I have no problem bringing to you guys multiple scenarios just to have a quick look at. I think that would be helpful as we make some of these
Yeah.
tougher decisions as we are going to be experiencing kind of a decline or expected decline, especially in interest income.
I mean, I get it about employee retention and everything, but we also have to really look at the overall budget.
Right,
Absolutely.
And everything else is going up too. I get all that, but
right.
I sat here and I'm going to be very conservative when we look at that budget.
Are we close to having the negotiations for the sergeants?
We can't.
We haven't heard.
We can't,
Okay.
yeah.
We've said our last and we have not
Gotcha.
heard yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of concur with Alderman Wilson that I think we still leave a couple of those scenarios. I think we've narrowed it down to potentially 8% for all, and maybe we still leave the 10%, 8%, 8%, 10%, but we definitely need to have those projections when they come about. Hopefully before we vote on the budget,
Right,
we'll know that. I
right.
think that'll be pretty important to know.
And you can kind of see a little bit, that last line item that's on there is the increase or decrease depending on which way you're going as well. So if we moved from what we did project of 10% directors, 8% frontline, that is a cost savings of about $20,000. Also, when you're talking salaries and compensation, that's kind of a compounding number as well, because that will build each year.
Rick, you'd mentioned when you started off that there's another city that I guess it had did a comparison. As I understand that right, that another place that already did a
No,
comparison?
so when we did our comp and classification study back in 2021, we were kind of ahead of the curve. We did that. And then a number of other cities have since done that. And that's kind of like we had talked about at the retreat, it's caused that kind of escalation of salaries for employees.
I misunderstood. I thought you said
Yeah.
someone had just recently done that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sure somebody
There,
did.
there are always
Yeah.
people doing, and some have already
I think
revised.
North Kansas City
And
in the last, well, their budgets start different times of the year too, so.
that is the other thing
I
that
know
we come
Riverside and
against.
North Kansas City had to do double digits.
But as
catch up.
we talked at the retreat, Gina looked at the information that was presented there that helps kind of formulate the discussion recommendations that we had initially provided. She looked internally, she kind of did a mini in-house reboot of that compensation study and took into consideration all the information that we had that other organizations had updated as well. Accurate assessment, Gina?
You can go ahead.
Okay.
Deb.
Yeah, Rick, just want to verify, this is fully loaded percentages. This is benefits,
Yes.
Yeah.
Total
Okay.
employee cost.
total employee costs.
Yeah, and also one thing we need to recognize is we do have some tenure in our director positions, and I think catching up on some of those is important. We might have people in positions below them that might exceed their pay if we don't do it the right way, which would really cause a problem, some departments.
I don't want to see us get to the point where Independence was with this vote in August of if that tax did not pass, they were looking at having to cut employees instead of, and I don't want Smithville to get to that point, and I'm concerned that that could happen.
When it's, I think that you mentioned compensation, Alderman Hartman, and I don't think besides loggers, I'm not sure if we can not, maybe it's something we might look at, not adjusting, making a loggers adjustment, and then keeping the pay higher. I'm not sure what that adjustment was, but.
We just
But
did a logger.
That's what we had
Oh,
done.
that's-
Yeah.
that's-
So I'm,
We just passed that one.
we
so-
did, so we didn't, in the 24 budget, we basically did a 3% across the across the board increase. That's what was included in the base budget. And we reviewed loggers for mid-year adjustment, and then that went into effect July 1.
And
So
this is,
then these numbers include that loggers amount then as well. So some of that reflects some of that increase.
okay,
So
so
that was based on conversations with employees last year of wanting to look at increasing retirement benefits.
right, so if it's a, let's say 6%, that includes the new logger.
That'll include.
That
That
includes the
includes
costs
it, right? It's not-
associated with loggers
At-
at that new salary
employee
amount. for-
cost.
Okay, okay, thank you.
And I would note, just as a reminder, so for the 24 budget, across the board, we had a 3% increase. Our police frontline employees voted to be represented, and their new contract went into effect with the first pay adjustments this year. Average increase was between 7 and 8% overall. And then they have a step come January 1. That step is reflected in these numbers. Then this spring, our sergeants voted to be recognized, and we're currently in discussions there. These numbers reflect current salaries for those sergeants who would have received an increase last year. Well, at the beginning of this year, November 1, with at 3%, just like all other employees. So those are the increases that we've had.
Okay, so it doesn't show any of the projection increases for sergeant
It doesn't, because we don't know
pay,
what that would be.
right? Okay, thank you.
And that's why I made the comment I did in the
Mhm.
very beginning,
Right.
since we don't know that yet.
Mhm.
Police staff is, sergeant is not.
Just to reiterate, that's 4 sergeants. So we have, there's 3 employees that are not part of the union. That'd be chief, correct?
Chief, yes.
And
We have chief,
Captain.
the
Captain.
captain, as well as then Jeanette.
Jeanette,
who's at
correct.
the Front office.
yeah, so the remaining officers are represented, and we're talking about the 4 sergeants, which you said you'd have projections once we
Right.
know that number.
And we do want to be very careful. We are in negotiations with the sergeants right now, so I can't talk any numbers on that or timelines or anything, so.
So what I think I'm hearing is come back here in just September, make sure I have a couple scenarios, go
Please.
up and down a couple, down 2, up 1.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. So,
Yeah, 6 and 8 and
Yep.
8 and
and then that way we can look at 5 years as well, see how that affects. Yep, okay. Next up is the general fund revenue summary projected for 25. I'm gonna talk about a couple of these as we go through this. First one I want to talk about is the property taxes. We do not have the assessed valuation from Clay County yet. So this number is trying to be as conservative as I can without having that certified number in front of me. Also worth noting is in 26, Clay County has adopted the senior rollback program. That'll be something that we'll be looking at as well. I believe their number is at 65, so 65 and older will be frozen the year before, and your property tax will be based on that.
Rick, I will jump in here as well. As he noted, we don't have the information. It's typical that we're still waiting on information from Clay County at this time as we're putting the budget together. But as was noted in the city administrator's report, and I'll talk about this during the regular session as well, but we will have to set the tax rate once we get that information from Clay County, and we'll need to do that by October 1. So as we get that information, we do have to take the assessed valuation and plug that into a state calculation so that we know what our max mill levy can be so that we aren't exceeding that. Then we also have to post that information for a public hearing. So we've got a process we have to follow there. We are in communication with the county assessor's office, trying to establish an ETA on that to be able to come up with a time to be able to schedule the setting of that tax rate. As you all know, we set that by ordinance, so it'll have to be 2 readings. We typically have had to do that as an emergency reading just in one meeting to be able to get that done because we are in crunch time after awaiting that information. We have the Platte County information. We don't have Clay County information yet.
Next up is the second line item on there, the sales and use tax. This is one area that we will monitor very close as we get those numbers coming in September. Like I mentioned during the 9-month, the last 4 or 5 weeks, we've seen kind of a decrease in that sales tax revenue. Don't know if that's just anomaly and it'll go back up, but we will be looking at this very closely. For 25, I have budgeted above our 24 budget, but slightly below what our projected revenue is for 24. I did this kind of just taking into effect the increases that we've had, especially in use tax, have been so great. I'm not comfortable if there is an economic downturn, if people are going to be still spending money. Of course, you gotta have your basic commodities. But just to be conservative at this point, looking forward, especially with that use tax number, which has just done wonders for us over the past couple of years. The next one is the franchise taxes. That has typically decreased slightly. One of the areas that we will typically see a decrease is in the cable franchise, people moving away from that type of service. Looking back at 23, I think we had a pretty good increase there. That increase had a lot to do with natural gas. There's probably either some development and or increases in natural gas prices, which I believe there was around that time. Finally, the licenses, fees, and permits. I want to make a special comment that municipal court has been transferred out of that bucket. We are seeing a slight decrease in that bucket. but we do expect some of these fees and permits to increase for 25, hopefully on the development side. Here's a quick pie chart, just kind of breaking out so you can see where the majority of our sales revenue comes from, or our revenue, general fund revenues come from. First off is sales tax, use tax, property tax. That equates to approximately 50%, 56% of our total revenue for the general fund. And that number at 56% has stayed relatively stable over the last 3 or 4 years. On the expenditure side of the general fund, we do have some increases proposed. I am slightly above where our projected is for 24. Like I've alluded to before, I'm hoping our ending 24 does come in a little less, but I was definitely conservative when I was looking at these numbers. For our proposed budget in 24 for the general fund, I have it at just over $7.4 million on the expenditure side. Personnel expenses are obviously the biggest bucket. It is pretty much at any organization. As we kind of look over at this next slide, you will may have gone up one too many. Personnel expenses is at 64%, projected to be at 64% of our 25 budget. That 64% is actually decreased a little bit. It is still a good percentage for most cities, most companies. Typically, you're seeing personnel expenses hit in the 70s. We are at 64 at this point. A lot of this is probably related to inflation, especially with commodities. You also have the capital projects. Those are always increasing. They're not coming down. And I should make a special note that the general fund, we do have obviously a few capital projects that do come out of the general fund. So as we look forward at those projects here shortly, we will kind of look and see how much that dollar amount is. There's potential of moving them out of the general fund or moving part of the expense out of the general fund. But we will look at that as we get closer to adopting the budget. Looking at the expenditures by department, public safety is the highest. That is probably across the board at any city municipality that you see. We are at 36% for police, 23% for public works, and 14% for parks and rec. That public works encompasses improving our roads and infrastructure. Here is the projects that we have slated for the general fund. As we look at this, we will continue to evaluate whether these funds can go to other funds or be absorbed, decreased, anything to get out of the general fund. For right now, the city, we have obligated some of the general fund money to go to capital projects. Those are now, the two bigger ones are in 26. The other portion of those will be in the capital improvement sales tax funds. And the
Rick,
way,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, the wayfinding signage, that is currently on a delay until we find out whether or not we have some grant funding come through.
And I might just note, Rick had noted on those two projects, the Second Creek Bridge project sidewalk and the Riverwalk Park and Trail project. Those are construction costs. Engineering and design for those projects are included for this coming year and are funded through other funds. The bulk of construction of those projects are also through other funds. As we work through the year and come up with design, come up with cost estimates, it may be that these can be reduced or moved to other funds, as Rick has noted. But in order to be able to address those funds, we were spreading out the costs over, in order to be able to address those projects, we're spreading out the costs over several funds.
Cynthia, that's, thanks for that reminder. Also, some of these projects are grants that will receive at completion, Chuck, or during the process?
During the process.
During the
It'd be during
construction
construction. And both of those projects are grant funded.
Right, looking at the projected 25 fund balance for the general fund, we are looking right now at a decrease in the fund balance of 743,000. Let me get to that real quick. Hold on one second. You are correct.
I see it now, yep.
I will follow up on that one as we go to our second discussion.
Sorry, I just said all that with my phone,
Yeah.
microphone not on, so, sorry.
All right, thank you for pointing that out. Off the top of my head, I cannot tell you where that 95,000 is. So hopefully this is the slide that is correct. And we will be ending our fund balance in 25 just below 2.5 million.
I think it'll be about 100,000 left because I took the 7440 in expenses minus the 6590 and that net change would have been 849.
If it
Yeah.
is 6.5. We've had 10 people look at this several times, so. All right, looking at the cash flow for the general fund for the 5-year projection. Right now, we do have expenditures outpacing revenue in the general fund. Keep in mind, we are projecting this. We do understand next year that we will have a decrease for sure. And then going forward, once you get out 2-3 years, those projections, I mean, things change constantly. So I would fully expect those numbers or those lines to get closer, reverse, as we know a little bit more about the future here. This is our reserve policy for the general fund. Our reserve policy again is at that 25%, which is that orange block down at the bottom there. That is based on operating expenses, which takes out any kind of capital projects or large one-time projects. So that is your top number. In previous years, both for 23 and 24, we do show that target reserve getting hit roughly around 2027. Now, I am showing it a little bit sooner. And like I've said, and I've reiterated many times, I'm trying to be as conservative as possible. I'd rather come back to you in September and say, hey, look, things came in just a little bit better, or they may have stayed the same. We will be addressing this. That gap for 26 is roughly 350,000. That could swing really quick. Expenses or revenue comes in 150,000 higher, expenses come in 200,000 lower. We've closed that gap. We will be analyzing this constantly going forward.
Just a quick question here. I don't think I've asked this before, maybe I have, but if we approach the reserve or start to hit the required reserve, what actions do we take as a board?
We'd be looking at any way to stop that, whether it's delaying projects, we'd be looking at ways to cut the budget. That's why we, on a quarterly basis, review the budget and always know where we are so we can make those adjustments. That 25% is a policy. It is not something that's state law. If we dip below it, there are no consequences or penalties, but we would want to ensure that we're constantly managing so that we don't, that is to ensure that we have adequate funds available for those rainy days.
Okay, when it said required, I've always had in my head that.
That required is a
If that
governing
doesn't
body
happen, we need
policy.
to-
It is
we
a
need to-
governing body
yeah.
policy. It is not a requirement of anything that we've got. That's something that we've set. As Rick had indicated earlier, and the mayor pointed out, up until 3 years ago, that was a 40% policy. And we reduced that. We've never dipped below the 40%, but we've had discussions that we were going to spend down below that in order to be able to continue to fund projects and services.
Right, okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I don't know if it was a correct statement, but I know when I was on the board before, we talked about, and I think I asked before, what happens if you dip into your reserve, and if the answer I was given, like you had like about 3 years to get that built back up. I don't know if that's just a thought process, since it's not a state
It's
Yeah, it's-
requirement, if
it-
it's just
it-
that
you-
you
it
looked at
takes-
trying to make sure you got back up, or if that's something we need to talk about. If we
We'd need
dip
to
below.
have that discussion.
Yeah.
One thing that would have an effect on would be if we were looking to debt finance things down the road, they look at that stability and where we are with that. That's one of the impacts that would occur there. The 3 year to get it back,
I think that was board policy.
I think that's more.
And a lot of boards are moving more towards number of operating months and things like that.
Yeah.
Riverside has 100% reserve policy because they have a casino. If that casino goes out of business, which a lot of things would have to go wrong for Argosy to go out of business, they want to make sure they have money. If we can't operate, if we stop getting property tax, which is paid once a year, we'd have a pretty good indicator because everybody would have moved, or half the town got wiped off the map by a tornado. Like, we would know.
Yeah, and this was before a lot of us as a board, but the policy, at 40% or above, I mean, it's just, I just didn't believe that's being good stewards. I mean, we
No.
have this money given to
If
us,
you're collecting
not given to
taxes-
us, but we're collecting the taxes. It's our responsibility to be fiscally responsible, and that's.
It was
why
a
we
stat-
have
It's,
it was
the
you're
that
reserve.
collecting
statement.
taxes, and if you're not spending those taxes, there's a,
It was a sad state when we had roads completely fall off the damn side of the road. I mean, we
Well,
lost half
then-
a
and it
street
too,
and we
the-
weren't paying
the-
to fix them.
The interest rate was almost zero for a period number of years, so
Yeah.
that money's just sitting there. And so, yeah, I mean, it's.
We had 120% board reserve and, or fund reserve, and streets falling off and undrivable. I saw pictures of Jack standing in a giant sinkhole. It took longer to repair than for Liberty to rebuild the entire intersection. Trees, gotta pay for those trees.
Okay.
Do we have a tree budget? I know Matt needs one for his parks board.
That next. So That is the last side of the general fund discussion before we get into combined water and wastewater. Any questions?
How's the bar screen coming? Well, Cynthia, they've been listening to you because all the wipes now say not flushable on them at the store, so.
Okay. I do
It
just
says
want
don't flush.
to kind of, before we get into the trash talk, sewer talk, potty talk, oh wait, following up, just to make sure, recap and that staff understands, as we bring information forward for the next review, before we have a finalized budget for you all, but the closest we can get, Rick will revise revenues based on current information. We'll have, more sales tax information. We will incorporate, I didn't hear, one way or the other on incorporating Northland Career Development Center $2,500 funds unless directed otherwise, we'll include that? Yes?
Yes.
No, shake
I
of
would like to include
heads.
it.
We okay, plug that in at 2,500?
There's at least 3 people saying yeah.
Okay, and then we will develop multiple scenarios with regard to employee compensation for review to see how those shake out with a fixed revenue information that has that impact on fund balance then. We may be calling Alderman Wilson in advance and having her double check all the numbers. I know,
I know that
it's-
will also
and I-
change your projected cash flow
Yes.
summary and
Right.
cash
Yep.
flow versus reserve.
Yep,
Right.
yep, yep,
I
that's,
don't want to
yeah.
get ahead of myself until I know which number was actually.
Yeah, what slide that came from or
Which
what
one?
was going
What
on there,
slide that got
what
plugged in
version,
from.
yeah.
Anything else? We moved on. All right, moving on to the combined water and wastewater fund. As we talked about at the last board meeting, we are proposing a 15% increase both in the water and the wastewater side. This is not only talked about in our rate study, but also a result of inflation. Everybody else is feeling the inflation. The city also feels the inflation. This 15% will be necessary for us to tackle some of these capital improvement projects coming up. Here is kind of an overview of where we've projected the 25 final ending fund balance for the combined water and wastewater fund. As you can see, kind of the revenues will be increasing. A lot of that will be due to some of the increase that we do have. And then we will, in 25, as we will see here shortly, start tackling some of these bigger projects that we have highlighted as needed projects to get done. We have scrubbed our project list many times, pushing back what we can and making sure that those items that need to get done are going to get done. Quick comment on this projected cash flow for the combined water and wastewater fund. This does not include COP issuance. We would hope to push off the COP issuance for as long as we can. That in turn saves taxpayers money due to issuance costs and interest and gives us more time as directed by the board to look at privatization. We feel that we can operate in this fund until through 2026. We'll obviously start having those discussions on COP issuance during 2026 if this pans out to be as actual as we are projecting. So as of right now, we are not looking at COP issuance next year, but discussions will start shortly afterwards. As you can see, that COP issuance will be required if everything stays as projected in 2027. We would dip to the negative in the fund balance, but with the COP issuance, that will not happen.
And just as a reminder, we've always anticipated using COPs to provide cash flow for those larger projects with the infusion of the earmark funding that we've talked about. That helps push down the road when we need to do the COP financing. As that project gets delayed further out, it just takes longer for us to get to that point. And as I'll discuss in the regular session in my city administrator's report, we have some additional information from a meeting with the Corps earlier this week related to that funding, and it will affect timing of that project as well.
Does this include the 15% projected increase? Year over year or just for next year?
This is projecting year over year for the next 2 or 3 years.
Okay, thank you.
Those projections are based on the rate model that we
Yeah,
use.
Tell us, right,
Mhm.
right?
Yep. Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Looking at the capital improvement plan projects for the combined water and wastewater fund. As you can see here, we do have some money earmarked, 1.5 million of federal money for the 144th Street lift station. We are expecting to hit roughly 5.1, just a hair higher than 5.1 on expenditures for projects that we had deemed necessary to complete in 25. A lot of those projects were carry forward projects.
I have a question here, and I don't know why I didn't think of this earlier, if I was in on discussions or not, but that Smith's Fork Force Main, why aren't we looking at gravity flow? Aren't we trying to go to gravity flow with everything? So why are we looking at a new force main?
It's a lateral to the one that's existing because the existing one doesn't have any outflow.
Okay, well, I was just
You don't have any
curious.
gravity to plug it into. Hi, Chuck. You brought your name tag.
Force main there, and gravity would be hugely expensive. We'd have to go all the way to the plant because of the grade.
$16 million, I think, is what those phases, Wilkerson's phases cost us.
Yeah.
If I'm remembering out of
When
the
we do the
plan.
Owens branch, I mean, that's gonna go up north. We've got that, I don't know how many phases that's right now, but, and we gotta go under the river so we'll be below what our gravity system
Okay.
is. We're tying into a manhole that's probably 4.5 feet deep.
Because the pipe alone on our gravity is gonna be what, 60 inches or more? We can't
Yeah.
go 4 feet
I was
underground.
just curious when I
Yeah.
seen that, I thought.
Oh,
So
No, this
that's
is to
the
fix
hookup.
the one that doesn't have the
absolutely. We
flow.
would definitely go gravity if we could.
Yeah.
But it's just not feasible.
But once we fixed everything out at the dam, we didn't have any flow on the other side, so that's why we're building a parallel line, right?
Yes, we've got a 4-inch force main right now. We're gonna put a 6-inch in so we can,
And then fix the
several
4.
more. But right now we got about an inch coming out.
I was, okay, I was
All
just
those wipes.
curious.
Campground wipes,
Old pipes.
old pipes,
Right.
and tree roots and wipes. And
Okay, thank you for the explanation then, Chuck.
I'd like to have Wilkerson 1, 2, and 3 done, but that's a big hole to dig.
All right, moving on as we are at 7 o'clock here.
And we're not even close to 5 a.m. yet.
You might be the only one here. Looking at 26, we do have a decrease in the capital improvement projects planned at this point of 3.3 million.
Just a hair over 3 million.
It's a hair over 3 million. And finally, our last 3 years wrapping up, we do have a big year, as you can, if you remember from a couple slides ago, our reserve does go, we do hit our reserve in 27. That is a big year of capital improvement projects. 28, again, we want to say take a little rest, but
Probably still be
one
finishing up those
project.
27 projects.
Right. It will be.
Yeah.
And then in 29, we increased quite a bit, and in 30, we have some residual from the water plant expansion for sure. So we do, as a city, have some very large projects that are absolutely necessary to complete. This necessitates that 15% increase in our water rates. And we will continue to look at these, making sure that we are prioritizing these projects for the next 5 years.
Residuals, including getting rid of residuals.
That equals roughly 25 million in projects over that period of time. That's a big number.
It's a big number.
It's a lot of water and sewer.
That shoots all over, it probably hits 35, if you pulled in 30.
I was gonna say
2030.
back before when they presented to us the plans for down the road with water and wastewater, it come in like a 32 million, and that's
Oh,
when I
yeah.
was on the board before.
On each
so,
plan.
Yeah, yeah.
On water and sewer separate.
Yeah, we had combined more than $50 million in projects over the next 30 years. That
Great.
was identified in the water and wastewater master plan. And that goes back to the conversations we've had of, building up reserves, not spending on projects and needing to do that.
Yep. Got a big brick building out at the dam that was paid for with no debt. So kill some zebra mussels out in the dam too.
Well, and that's also, I mean, the obvious here I'm stating is that it's assuming we're going to continue to grow as a city, right? I mean, if you look back to 2000, 2003, I mean, we've grown 90% in population. So that's,
Well, zebra
Well, I
mussels.
also want to
Zebra
remind the
mussels
board,
weren't from growth.
well, yeah, but we talked at the retreat as well.
Yeah.
Those projects on the north end are going to be required to support growth because we will be at a point where we will not be able to allow any more building permits if we don't have that capacity. So we have to continue that growth.
Yep.
Right, moving on, looking at water impact projects. This is a cost sharing one. Water impact or any kind of impact fee. Typically, we get a higher balance in these funds and then spend it on the bigger projects. This is obviously a 50% share with another fund at $700,000. Transportation sales tax fund. Again, quite a bit of projects happening over the next 5 years. You will see here, I talked about during the 9-month budget update, that 960,000 mark reimbursement that is seen here in the first column for 2025. And this next slide will give a kind of a visual. As we have our bigger projects, we are also incorporating those projects with the reimbursements. So you can see that darker red, orange line as the reimbursement chart, and that closely mimics our expenses. Looking at the capital improvement sales tax fund. Here is the other side of those two projects that we do have pegged for the general fund in 2026. Though that is the Second Creek sidewalks, which also has a mark reimbursement, and then also the River Walk and Trail, which also has a $408,000 mark reimbursement. Next year will be a big year for this fund.
Oh, just in grant total, we're looking at between this and WARDA, it's $4.5 million.
Yeah. Yep.
More than our budget was 6 years ago.
Looking at the last 3 years, the capital improvement sales tax fund. Again, right now, having just a few projects, probably more in the engineering phase in 27 and 28, and then picking back up there in 29. Just like the transportation sales tax fund, here is a graph showing when our expenses increase, we are also getting reimbursement either from federal or MARC reimbursement. We will be obviously watching it very closely in 25 as fund balance will be eaten up with those high dollar projects that we have going on.
I also don't believe we set a reserve on this one because this is,
We do not have. a
this is
reserve.
taxpayer voted. We want it spent.
We only have the reserve on the general fund and fine water. and
QC, yeah,
wastewater.
CW.
Looking at the park and stormwater sales tax fund, quite a bit going on in 25. That last column, that Riverwalk and Trail construction, that design phase is happening this year. So, Chuck?
Design
The
for,
design, the design phase has started for Riverwalk and Trail construction. Okay. Then looking at the final 4 years of our 5-year projection, steadily getting projects done. As you can see, that Smith's Fork Park Complex in 28, pretty large project that we are saving fund balance for.
and cash.
And then again, another visual of our expenses, our balance, as well as any reimbursements that we would be receiving as of today. And again, it's worthy to mention, we are, as that asterisk says, we are increasing our fund balance for that large project in 28. Next up is the vehicle and equipment replacement fund. As I mentioned in the 9-month update, we are analyzing this as close as possible. We are at what we say is our capacity, for lack of better terminology, of vehicles at 38. We have 11 in police, 3 in development, 8 in streets, 10 in utilities, and 6 in parks and rec.
Is there just a question, is there a backup anymore? Did we catch up? We caught up everything from the backup, right? For the vehicles, we're all
We've,
caught up now?
backup of receiving, we
Yeah.
have all of our fleets that have been ordered or
Or here,
have been delivered.
good, good.
Yeah. Saw 8 pretty police cars when I walked in tonight. They all match. Except Tony's truck, kind of at the end is a little off.
All right, looking at the expense and revenue side of that fund. As you can see, that will be very close in most years. This year, we do have revenue slightly below my projections for the expense side, but we will have that caught up and mimic revenue and expenses as close as possible going forward. Sanitation fund. Kind of off to the right there, that box. As of July of this year, our GFL service was to 3,152 regular trash accounts and 552 senior trash accounts. Those numbers, like I mentioned before, are slightly below where we were at last year. I don't know if there's much to read into that, just based on utility accounts. Again, we dictate how GFL charges us by sending them a monthly utility account balance. For 25, the increase that we have for this account is roughly 4.5%. The regular trash rate will go from $20.16 per month to $21.07 per month. That senior rate will be trued up and will follow the 21.7% or $21.7 or $21.07 per month and 15% below that. Here we can see kind of all funds total for CIP.
Okay, Melissa, 46 million.
We definitely have some big years coming up here. Another summary page of all funds, our projected cash balance ending in that last column. And I will wrap up with kind of a budget process schedule here. We are looking at a second discussion of the operating budget sometime in September. And then going to public hearing and finalizing the budget in early October. Any questions?
Doesn't sound like you have any real major changes to get the budget wrapped up. So does October 1 still work, or do you think the 15th is more reasonable, knowing that Clay County is a little behind on the assessment stuff?
I'm fairly confident we can be ready for the earlier date. When we come back in September, I will have the scenarios. We'll be able to analyze it a little bit closer, hopefully have some better revenue and expense projections, and kind of know where some of the Fed rates are going and kind of make some decisions at that point.
I mean, I talked to Cynthia about this on Monday. We do have 5 Tuesdays in October if you needed a little more time.
Okay,
We got time.
duly noted.
Hey, Rick, have you, on the slide, you don't have the slides in this presentation, but the ones where you put the monthly bill and the increase over the years, did you project that out to 2029 too, again, or have you?
And what fund are you talking about?
For the monthly, water and sewer bill? You didn't show the slide here, but you had another slide that you've shown where it's projected the growth on the
Right.
total bill, right? Did you project that out to 2029? I think the last one was just till next year. I didn't know if you had or not.
In theory,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
That one's kind of a hard one to project. I mean, we will be analyzing that going forward, be looking at those rate increases. But in theory, yes, I could project on that and bring that to you at the next discussion.
I was just wondering if you looked at it, that's okay. So Raftellus, they came back with we're in year 3, right? Of the rate study review. Is that this is next year's year 3, right?
Well, no. We did the Raftellus rate study in 2018 and implemented the first increases in 2019. And then we used that to set rates for the 2019 for the 2020 budget, 2020 for the 21 budget. We brought them back in to revise that information when we're in the 3rd year of the revised information. But we have done annual increases since 2019 when we first brought them on. And those were the first increases in common recollection of anyone working around here. And Bob Limley just retired after 25 years. So we hadn't had increases for a number of years. And now we've had double-digit increases for the last 5 years.
Okay, and the one I'm thinking of, I came on board in 2022 and I was able to catch the presentation.
That
and
was when they revised. So we had hired them to do an initial round and then they came and revised that information. And we continue to use that model to project those rate increases.
Okay, so from what I remember here, that was in 2022 and they showed a 5-year projection with 15% increase in the last year, I think it was 19%, if I'm just off of memory.
I
maybe
don't
I'm
remember
not.
what it was, but yeah, and those,
So that would put us in next year in year three. And the only thing I'm saying here is looking outward here, it would be, if we did a 15, and then a 19 for a total of 49%, would it behoove us to just, entertain a 50% increase and tell the employees we wouldn't give, or tell all the citizens we wouldn't have a tax increase for 3 years? It would save them money in the end. A rate increase, yeah, it would save them money in the long run, because it wouldn't be compounded. Do you know what I mean? It wouldn't be 15% on the last 15% increase. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I'm tracking. One of the things, the rate study changes every year as we have increased costs, we change projects. We have that study that Reftelis did, and we plug in our scenarios and we look at those increases and try to match revenues to what we need for expenditures.
I,
Right.
and I'm mainly
And-
being facetious there, guys, but just saying that, we're projecting in the next 3 years a 50% increase in the
Mhm.
water rate, the water and sewer, right?
Right.
That's what I'm saying. So I mean,
That study
looking for.
actually has it going through 2029.
Mhm.
Okay,
50.
you're just looking for, I mean, you're throwing off the wall stuff out there that if there was a way to just tear the Band-Aid off and, get some projects done and fund it and not have it increase for 3, 4 years, I'm not sure. If we looked that far, I'm sure that, the citizenship would probably be knocking at the door, if we proposed a 50% rate increase.
I think
So
you'd have
that's probably,
mutiny.
huh?
You'd have mutiny.
Exactly. That's why I say my
I
band.
mean, you can kind of absorb, a small increase each year, but to come back and say
Right.
50% increase in 1 year.
I was waiting for Melissa to pipe up there. I'm being facetious. I'm just saying that if we're looking at a 3.2% cost of living increase and 50 to 19% rate increase for 3 years, it's a big ding to everybody. And Rick, I know you've been working hard on this as well as your staff, Cynthia. So thank you on that for your work that's been done on it. And that's enough for me. Thank you.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to adjourn work session.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Stand adjourned. Might as well just roll into the next meeting. We should get Zoom ready, or do we need to stay on the same one? Okay.
Bless you.